All right. Shalom, shalom. We are here. We are have a little Yom Teruah study. We're going to look at the different significances of the Feast of Trumpets. Let me just go over here. There we go. Okay, all right. Let's get started here. Go through these slides. Oh, wait, I can't. Gotta be over here. There we go. Okay. We are dealing with understanding feast days. All right, so it's a little list of all of the different feast days. When you look at all of the feast days, you're able to see a picture of the total plan of salvation, actually, from start to finish. When we think about where we are in the Feast of Trumpets, Yom Teruah. So we'll be discussing the different things that we can see that we find in this day here. Okay, so we want to take a look at the feast days from the perspective of understanding the past significance of these days and times so that we can see what they mean for us today. And specifically for us, we are dealing with Yom Teruah, which is the day of trumpets. Day of Trumpets. Okay, so this day, the Day of Trumpets, marks the beginning of the 7th month, which includes all of the Most High's holy days, revealing his plan for our future. When we think about the fall feasts, their spiritual significances are future tense. The fulfillment of the fall feast, the feast that we find in the 7th month, their significances that they have are future, as opposed to the spring feasts, which their fulfillments have already come to pass. In terms of Passover, Yeshua was our Passover lamb. He's came and he's done that. In terms of Shavuot, the pouring out of the Spirit, the giving of the commandments, those things have happened already. But when we look at the fall feasts, trumpets, atonement, booths, or tabernacles, and the last great day, these all are dealing with things that are their fulfillment is yet to come. Okay, so let's look at the Torah and see where it talks about one place in particular where it talks about Yom Teruah. We can just read Leviticus 23 through 25. Somebody just read that nice.
And Yahweh spoke to Moshe, saying, "Speak saying, in the seventh new moon, on the first day of the new moon, you have a rest, a remembrance of Teruah, a set apart gathering. You do no servile work, and you shall bring an offering made by fire to Yahweh."
Okay, so we see in the book of Leviticus where all of the feast days are presented to us from the Sabbath, which is our weekly feast, all the way through, all the feast days, all the way up to the last great day. So here in Leviticus 23, verse 23 through 25, we see it talks to us about the Day of Trumpets, where we know it, by the beginning of this first, the beginning of this new month, the seventh new month. And then it begins to talk about what you do on the day. So this verse tells you when it is and what you do on it. We don't really have much. When we think about the feast days, a lot of them have their significances that are kind of built into the day. Like when you think about Passover, you remember the Passover, right? You remember the Exodus from Egypt. When you think about unleavened bread, that was part of what they did in terms of the preparation and getting ready for leaving out of Egypt. When you talk about Shavuot, we connect that with the commandments being given. So we look at these things. We think about atonement. There was a Day of Atonement when they dealt with atoning for the sins of the year. And tabernacles, you deal with remembering the wilderness. You think about all of these feasts, there's all of these things that are connected with it. But when we look at the Day of Trumpets, we don't see necessarily something that there something to remember, even though it tells for us to actually remember this day. So we're forced to have to look at what's given to us to be able to draw from what we have in order to build and understand the significance of the day. So let's look at a few things here. The new moon. So again, the seventh new moon is the beginning of Yom Teruah. It's the beginning of the month. It's the beginning of the seventh month. It is the time when we recognize this day. We would have went and looked for the moon yesterday, but it was totally rainy and cloudy. It's been impossible to be able to see the thing in this region. But let's look at this a little bit here. New moon. That word is Kodesh. Kodesh means new moon, by implication, a month. I think the King James says on the seventh month. This version, because the word there is Kodesh. It literally is giving you the idea of a new moon. The moon becoming new, or Kodesh. That word Kodesh comes from this root Kadash, which means to be new, or to rebuild, or to renew, or to repair. So when we look at the new moon, the first visible crescent, we can visibly see something becoming new. It goes from being in a state of death or sleep or hibernation or darkness to a state of being alive, awake, illuminated, and renewed. Now, if we think about the cycles of the moon, it goes from a state of light to no light. So you understand the new moon to be that return of the light. The moon held an important place in the kingdom of nature. As known to the Hebrews, conjointly with the sun, it was appointed for signs and for seasons, as it says in uh, Genesis 1 and 14, and for days and years. Though in this respect, it exercised a more important influence if by the seasons we understand the great religious festivals of Israel. And in fact, the seasons, that word for seasons is uh, moed, which many places refers to the festival times. So we use the moon to be able to signify, to understand when these festival times are. Psalms 104, 119 says, He appointed the moon for seasons. The sun knows when to set. The moon also is in all things for her season, for a declaration of times and a sign of the world. For the moon is the sign of the feast day, a light that wanes when she is come to the full. The month is called after her name, increasing wonderfully in her changing. An instrument of the army on high, shining forth in the firmament of heaven. The beauty of heaven, the glory of the stars, an ornament giving light in the highest places of the Almighty. All these things talking about the moon and the significance that it has in regards to the months. This is from the Apocrypha here. So, on the sighting of the seventh new moon, this festive day, Yom Teruah, begins. And as we continue to look, we will see that every detail points us to a better understanding of its significance. So let's talk about Teruah. Let's talk about the sound, the clamoring sound. This word Teruah, and guys should blow on his little shofar there. Teruah means clamor. That is acclamation of joy or battle cry. We really had some serious clamoring going on in here a little while ago when we was with these little noisemakers and so on and so forth. So there was some definite teruah going on, right? Clamor. It it's really, the word really is about the sound that's made. It's translated as trumpets because when you blow a trumpet, right, it makes noise, but it literally means this a clamoring, a loud clamoring sound of shout or rejoicing. It indicates a shout of joy, shout of alarm, a battle cry. First, it refers to a loud, sharp shout or cry in general, but it often indicates a shout of joy or victory. A great shout anticipating a coming event. It can refer to the noise or single put out by an instrument. Amos used the word to refer to war cries. So we see the different ways that this word is used, and we think about Numbers chapter 10, I believe it is, where it talks about the different ways that the trumpets are used in terms of whether it's gathering or whether it's gathering the people together, or whether it's gathering for war or for a solemn assembly. So, but again, when we look at this word teruah, again, it is this word that means uh, a loud shout of an alarm, which can, when you think about it, when you think about an alarm or a shout or even a battle cry, as we look, we see a battle cry can be something, depending on which side you're on, right? It can be something that's a good thing, or it could be something that's a bad thing, right? If you're the one who's declaring the battle, you're the one taking your battle to another place, right? You're ready for battle, right? Maybe that's a good sound for you. But if you're on the receiving end, right, you're not ready for battle. You haven't done any preparations or whatever, right? That battle cry for you is something that's undesirable thing, right? So this sound that's made, this clamoring sound, can be a thing that's both positive or negative. All right, so let's keep going.
Do y'all remember when that Hawaiian alarm went off? Remember a few years ago?
Oh yeah,
that's what this reminds me of.
Yeah.
Hawaiian?
A missile on Hawaii, right?
Like last year.
Last year?
They
it was a mistake.
It was a mistake. They sent out a nuclear incoming missile.
Oh my goodness!
To all the people through their cell phone and all that stuff.
Like get ready, there's shelter, a missile coming.
Missile was coming in.
But it wasn't no missile.
But it was, someone accidentally hit the button. Yeah. But it reminds, like, if you're on that side, like you're not ready.
Yeah.
That's a scary.
Right. Which and thinking about Yom Teruah, that's it's all about which side you're on. Okay, so let's take a look at the ancient. It's interesting to see what we can see through the ancient. Right, so Teruah looks like this: a tav and a resh and a vav, an ayin and a hey. Teruah. And in the ancient, looks like this. These are the corresponding letters in the ancient. The tav looks like this, and a resh, the guy with his little afro, and the vav, and the ayin, and the man with his arms raised. Okay, so we look, the tav again is this X marks the spot, this little cross looking thing here, which has the idea of a mark or a sign. Tav. The resh, the second letter of Teruah, the resh, again, is the man's head, which my man kind of looks like a duck, I think, but
a turtle.
That's a man's head, right? He has the idea of head or top or beginning. The Vav is a tent peg. Tent peg. And it has the idea of adding, to add, or to secure something. The Ein is an eye, right? The Ein is an eye, and it has the idea of being able to see or to know. And lastly, the Hey is the man with his arms raised, which has the idea of breath, or to breathe, or to reveal something. So the root of the word teruah, the root of teruah is ruah. So if we look over here, this teruah, looking at it in the English, it has a prefix and a suffix. They put the tav as a prefix and the hey is a suffix. The word without the tav at the beginning and the hey at the end in the Hebrew looks like this, ruah. So we want to look at that. It means to mar, figuratively to split the ears with sound.
That's what we experienced today.
Yes, we definitely experienced some.
Christian didn't experience.
No, he didn't. Don't worry, you will.
I was neglected.
Right, the splitting of the ears, right? That is the sound for alarm or joy. Blow an alarm, cry, alarm, a loud out, destroy, make a joyful noise, shout, so on and so forth. Right. So again, we think about teruah, we only get to the idea of trumpets based on the fact that a trumpet is used for making the sound. It's named. The name actually comes from the sound that it makes, right? Like something else that we know. Right, Nakash. The serpent in the garden. The name of the serpent comes from the sound that it makes, Nakash. So it's the same idea with ruah here. Okay, so this word in the ancient could actually look two different ways, therefore expressing two separate ideas. When we look at this word ruah in the ancient, it actually can look two different ways, and we'll see why that is the case. Because the ein, again, which is the eye, meaning the eye or to see or to know, they found out that in ancient times, the ein had another way of another picture that was associated with it, which was the twisted rope. The twisted rope, right? Which gives you the idea of perversion, things being all twisted up together. So if we look at the ein as the eye, that word ruah gives us the idea, it means, which means securing or adding knowledge from the head, securing or adding knowledge from the head or to the head, right? This idea of securing or adding knowledge from or to the head, right? So we look at this with this way, it will be positive, right? You'd be adding knowledge or adding intimate knowledge coming from or to our head. But if we looked at it from this way, same word, just a different version of the ein, we would be securing or adding twistedness to our head, or adding twistedness from the head, right? So when we think about the idea again of teruah being just the sound that's going out, depending on the hearer, even the giver of the sound that's going out, depending on what the response is to the sound, there can be a positive thing associated with it, or a negative thing associated with it. And we can even just also see that even by looking at the ancient there. Okay, so Yom Teruah, as it was observed in ancient times, was an amplified new moon feast. The feast was always held to bring in the new month. However, Yom Teruah was a commanded high day that was given the same way as a Sabbath. So we seen from back looking at the verse where on this day there was to be you wasn't supposed to do any work, and you were supposed to have a holy convocation, right? So it's actually called a Shabbaton. So it's given the same weight as a Sabbath, but it's not literally called a Sabbath, but you would do all of the things on that day that you would do on a Sabbath. So the trumpets is a shout of life and death. Life and death. It could be about life, or the shout could be about death. It could be about ending, and it could be about new beginning. It could be about joy. It could be about pain. It could be about joy or pain. It could be about sunshine or rain.
Oh my.
Or it could be about rejoicing and sorrow.
Oh my goodness.
All right, so
I heard that song in my head. Going down it.
Going down the list.
So, but it all depends on your response to the alarm. What will your response be to the call that's going out? That's the thing that differentiates, what it means to you, whether it's sunshine or rain. Okay, so let's see something that Yeshua has to say about the idea of making a call. Let's look over at Matthew 22. Somebody can read this here.
And Yeshua responded and spoke to them again by parables and said, the region of the heavens is like a man, a sovereign, who made a wedding feast for his son and sent out his servants to call those who were invited to the wedding feast. But they would not come. Again, he sent out other servants, saying, say to those who are invited, see, I have prepared my dinner. My oxen and fatted cattle are slaughtered, and all is ready. Come to the wedding feast. But they disagreed, they disregarded it and went their way. This one to his field, that one to his trade, and the rest having seized his servants, insulted and killed them. But when the sovereign heard, he was wroth, and sent out his soldiers, destroyed those murderers, and set their city on fire.
Okay, right. So we see here this thing going on, this wedding feast, this call for the feast, a call for people to come to the feast. Some people just didn't even pay no attention. Some people sat up there and killed the people that was just trying to tell the people that there was a feast, right? So we see all these different responses to the call, right? So let's keep reading here. Go ahead. Read the rest of it.
Then he said to his servants, the wedding feast indeed is ready, but those who were invited were not worthy. Therefore, go into the street corner, and as many as you find, invite to the wedding feast. And those servants went out into the street corners and gathered all whom they found, both wicked and good. And the wedding hall was filled with guests. And when the sovereign came in to view the guests, he saw there a man who had not put on a wedding garment. And he said to him, friend, how did you come in here not having a wedding garment? And he was speechless. Then the sovereign said to the servants, bind him hand and foot, take him away, and throw him out into the outer darkness. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth, for many are called, but few are chosen.
Okay, so interesting verses here. Many are called, but few are chosen. Right? When we see this verse here, we see kind of this dichotomy, this kind of a separation between the called and the chosen. We see two different aspects of people, right? Let's look at the called. The called are those that are in this word Greek here. This Greek word kletos means invited or appointed or specifically a saint or called. When we look at the context, the idea that this word kletos is bringing forth is the idea of an invitation going out, just the actual call, right? So we look at this word is dealing with the invitation. We saw how there was all kinds of people that were invited, right? But what was the response to the invitation? So we must look at and pay attention to this key point in the parable. And he said to him, friend, how did you come in here not having a wedding garment? And he was speechless. Right? Think about when you just read that, when you just read the entire text, you talk about this poor person, right? He just went and got these people off the street. And then when they get there, he's talking about, where's your wedding garment?
Good and bad people.
Yeah, everybody was invited, right? But yeah, that's something to think about as well, is that the fact that people that was invited, it didn't have anything to do with who they was necessarily. There was a feast. There needed to be people at the feast. Whether you was good or bad, you was invited to the feast. But I think this here even can help us understand the idea of, we're thinking about it from a spiritual perspective, about both the good and the bad, or the rich and the poor. When we get to this thing that happens here with the sovereign, with the king asking this person, how did you come in here not having a wedding garment? And the guy didn't have an answer, right? He was speechless. It seemed to be important not only to hear the call, but to respond appropriately to the call. Just showing up wasn't enough. right? There has to be an appropriate response to the call that's made. Think about this. Consider this. We say this here. Hear, O Yisrael, Yahweh our Elohim, Yahweh is one. This word here is, of course, Shema. And Shema is not just hearing an audible call. It's about obedience, about hearing a particular call and having understanding and making an appropriate response to the call. Right? So there's hearing and there is obedience to the call. There's a proper response that's connected to the call in this idea of Shema.
Because if you hear it and you don't do it, then it's like
you must not have heard it. Did you hear what I said? Did you hear what I said? Right? When you say that, you're not really just thinking about did you actually hear did your eardrum vibrate from the sound waves that came out of my mouth and then resonated inside of your eardrums, right? That's not what we're talking about when I say to my son, did you hear what I said? Right? There's obedience attached to it, right? So it's the same thing we think about with Shema. And that's what separates the called from the chosen, right? What is that response? And think about Teruah again. That's why it can be this one singular call going out, and there being, those that hear the call, and for them is joy, and then those hear that same exact identical call, and for them it is pain. We think about Ruah again. If we think about the Ein as being the I, there's intimate knowledge attached to it, a relationship. We think about it, the Ein as being that twisted rope. It's perversion. Things are all twisted up, and it's inordinate. All right, so the chosen used in that verse in Matthew is this word here, eklektos. Select, favorite, chosen, elect. You can probably see how this English word probably came directly from this eklektos. You can definitely see that there. So the word chosen is eklektos, or favorite, right? So again, many are called, but few chosen. We must be obedient to be able to receive the call, right? It's not just about audibly hearing the call, but what is your response? What is your response to the call? Now, scholars believe that it was tradition for the king to have provided the proper attire for his guests. So it is not surprising then that the king becomes furious upon seeing a man improperly dressed. This shows that the man deliberately refuses to receive the generous gesture of the king or providing the proper attire. So when we think about this thing, we're looking back thinking about the one who did not have the clothes on. The king is not only inviting you to his feast, but he's also providing you with the clothes that make it appropriate for you to even be there. So for you to have the invitation and then to have the clothing provided for you, and then for you not to have on the proper attire, and then now that the king shows up and like, what are you doing? Where your clothes at? And then there's not, he don't even have no good excuse for himself. Right. Yeah, right. So again, it's all about the response, right, that you have to the calling. So when we think about Yom Teruah and the call going forth, the key again is how we respond to the call. Do we respond to it with acceptance and trust, or do we reject it out of doubt? Again, the Ruah, again, is going to have the positive thing attached to it, knowledge, intimate knowledge, relationship, or twistedness and perversion. Same word with different results attached to it. Acceptance involves in receiving the garments, right? That would have been the proper acceptance in terms of looking back at the story that Yeshua was going through, not just going to the thing, but going to the thing with the garments that were provided, right? Now, if we look in other scriptures, we can see that these garments, wedding garments, are a picture of righteousness. Isaiah 61, 10, 11 says, I greatly rejoice in Yahweh. My being, my soul exults in my Elohim, for he has put garments of deliverance on me. He has covered me with the robe of righteousness. As a bridegroom decks himself with ornaments, and as a bride adorns herself with her jewels. For as the earth brings forth its bud, as the garden causes the seed to shoot up, so the Master Yahweh causes righteousness and praise to shoot up before all the nations. Notice that these attributes are being bestowed upon the subject in Isaiah from the Almighty. Right, just the same idea, right? And also, it seems as if it is a natural progression as it is compared to seed growing out from the earth in terms of the righteousness, right? Was compared to a seed in the earth, right? The seed is planted, and what happens when the seed is planted, it grows, right? And that's the way that righteousness is, was to go throughout the earth from the salvation and the righteousness that was bestowed upon the people, right? So when we think about this idea of attaining these attributes from the Father, and them being as a thing that grows and spreads through the earth. Let's look at another one. Revelation 19, 7 and 8 says, let us be glad and rejoice and give him praise, for the marriage of the Lamb has come, and his wife prepared herself, and to her it was given to be dressed in fine linen, clean and bright, for the fine linen is the righteousness of the set apart one. So again, we see the connection between the righteousness and the garments, and again these garments, these clothes that are being bestowed upon individuals, and again they are being compared to or likened unto righteousness, our righteousness. right? So we could very well look at this and think about this from the negative perspective in terms of, this wife who didn't prepare herself with the garments, right, of righteousness. Where would she be, right? It's all about the response to the call. Okay, so when we think about righteousness, go over at Romans 3:21 and 22. It says, but now, apart from the Torah, a righteousness of Elohim has been revealed, being witnessed. Okay, so a right Elohim has been revealed, being witnessed by the Torah and the prophets. And the righteousness of Elohim is through belief in Yeshua Messiah to all and on all who believe. There is no difference. So when we think about the idea of righteousness being bestowed upon us, it's bestowed upon us how? By belief in Messiah.
Justification.
Right? It doesn't have anything to do with our own righteousness, because we look up here where how it even begins. But now, apart from the Torah, a righteousness of Elohim has been revealed, being witnessed by the Torah and the prophets. This righteousness of Elohim is not through things that you have done, but through belief in Messiah. So it's a thing that is disconnected from, it's not originating from the individual, right? It's just like the wedding garments. It's things that are being bestowed upon you, given to you. I like saying bestowed. Okay, so when we think about Yom Teruah as it relates to us today, we can see the shout, that acclamation is an invitation to our faith. The response of that call leads to life or death. We think about Yom Teruah for those that are believers in Messiah. For you, right? You are the one who are making the call, right? If we was going to stick believers in the parable that Yeshua gave, you're the servants going out with the invitations, right? Yom Teruah is not about your deciding. You've already made the decision. You're making the noise. Well, all of them wasn't getting killed, but yeah, you're the ones getting killed, right? Because you're making the sound, because you're making the noise. And then the response to the call, again, leads to life or death. It's interesting when you think about it in regards to the what you have brought up in terms of people who was invited. Good people and bad people was invited, right? Because it don't really got nothing to do with that. Because I'm gonna give you what you need to be appropriate at the place when you get here. Right? The king is going to provide you with the clothes. Don't matter what you got, what you're bringing to the situation. I'm going to cover you when you get here.
You hear people always say, I don't have, like, even if you invite them to our home for service, they'll be like, I don't have clothes to wear. So that's the reason that they're not going to come. People say that. They're like, I don't have anything to wear. And it's like, okay, we go to the thrift store with me on half price day and we'll get you something,
Yeah.
But it's kind of like, it's just that mentality. Or I've sinned. My sin is too egregious to be covered by the Most High.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Or I don't know if I could be forgiven.
So if we think about that in connection with the wedding feast, those people who's coming up with their various excuses, at the end of the day, it's all just an excuse not to come to the feast. Where, when that final one went out, when it was about taking the people good or bad, again, it doesn't matter where you are to accept the call. And whether you're the chosen depends on how you respond to the call.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
Yeah. So thinking of the person who showed up, didn't put on the garments,
Mm-hmm.
and was bound. That reminds me of people who feel like they're good enough and they don't need Yeshua. You know what I mean? They feel like, I don't need none of that type of stuff. You know what I'm saying? I'm gonna show up on my own merits. Like, I'm gonna stand before, the Most High and be deemed worthy.
Yeah. Right.
And
No, I like that. That was really,
which is a mistake.
I know, because you're gonna get burnt up.
Right.
You're gonna get burnt up.
But there's a lot of people who think like that. Like,
Wow, Christian, that's a revelation right there.
Right.
That's a revelation.
And I think that when we look at this story, this idea of being called and chosen, this call to the feast, and we think about what significances we see inside of Yom Teruah. Again, we think about the feast days. You were quote unquote saved back at Passover, right? So Yom Teruah for you is not about you accepting the call, because you've already did that at Passover, right? You've already put the blood of Messiah on the doorposts of your heart, from a spiritual perspective at Passover. Now it's to the point where when we looked at that verse over in Isaiah 61, where if we go all the way back to the beginning of Isaiah 61, let me just pull it up here. Isaiah 61 verse 1 says, the spirit of the master Yahweh is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring good news to the meek. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim release to the captives, and the opening of the prison to those who are bound. When we think about Yom Teruah, it's after you've accepted the blood of Yeshua already. It's after you've received that spirit, right? Here, the spirit is upon you now to do what? To bring the good news to the meek, to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim release to the captives and the opening of the prisons. Then when you go all the way to the end of that is where we were reading before, in terms of the garments of deliverance being on you and being covered with these robes of righteousness.
I was just thinking about something else about the call to, it talks about liberty to the captives, and Jubilee, like, and how Jubilee would occur and start on the day of the Day of Atonement.
Say that again.
How the call is for liberty or Jubilee, and that Jubilee occurs on the Day of Atonement.
Yeah.
So it's like, this Jubilee is coming. This, I guess, even with the Day of Atonement, there's two sides to that. There's either a side of liberty or a side of judgment.
Right.
So it's like an advance warning ahead of time that, you get yourself together.
Right. So when we think about this, when we think about all of these things, right, in the scope of all of the feasts as a collective, Teruah is ... Teruah is that call that you put forth. That call that invitation that you put forth, that manifestation of righteousness that has been put on you, being manifest in your life and through your life, reaching others. Right? When we think about what Teruah is you letting it be known that Messiah is returning. Right? And for some, that's joyous. But for some, that's pain. Right? And they might not even realize that it is. Right? But it's all about this to the call. It's all about the response to the call. It's a call to repentance. Right? It's a call to repentance. Right? And again, we think about it in the scope of the plan of salvation. Again, Teruah, for those that are believers in Messiah already, is about action for you. It's about action for you, and it's about you sending out that invitation. Because the things that are to come are what? The very next thing is atonement. When we think about atonement, and it's, without going too much into it, is about judgment. Right? So if you're declaring the final judgment to the world, it's important to be on the right side of that. Right? So here, let me this. Okay, so in closing, when we think about, again, Yom Teruah, when we think about this day of trumpets, we think about this idea of being that clamoring sound, being that one that is pronouncing Messiah to the nations, to the world, to all that are around you, that Messiah is coming, right? There's going to be there is a war at hand, and whose side are you going to be on? Okay, so are there any thoughts or questions or comments about any of that?
Good stuff.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Good.
Broke it down.
Yeah. Great.
Ebony said something. Ebony, do you want to say what you was saying in there or no? She's talking about how we was called to be lights in the world, and how sometimes, we live our life, and when people can see us and how we live, but sometimes it becomes necessary to say something.
Yeah.
So we could, we should live righteously, but then sometimes it becomes necessary to be vocal.
Well, it's interesting because when you think about a storm,
like the one that's about that,
or the one that just happened a couple of days ago. Right, I'm outside working in the rain, and there's thunder. There's a loud clamoring sound, right? But that sound is only from the light. If there's thunder, there's lightning. They're the same thing. Thunder is the sound that the lightning makes. Right? Those things are right. So when you think about the idea of this clamoring sound, think about it like lightning. We are light. We are light, right? Yes, indeed, we are light. But one of the purest lights that we know of makes noise. Right? It's pretty loud too. It's pretty it can be scary too, especially if you're on a ladder. Okay, so remember that.
That was pretty good too, because you always talk about whenever the fire came down on
they probably got struck by
Nadab and Abihu. It's probably
lightning is fire.
Fire. What happened there?
It's definitely a clamoring sound.
Yeah.
Right? So be lights. Be lightning. Right? Maybe you're just some far away lightning where there's a big gap between the light and the sound. Or maybe you're close up lightning where it's all at once. Okay. All right. Yom Teruah. That's it. That's what we got for today.